In the heart of what is now Silicon Valley, in the sun-drenched city of San Jose, California, stands a sprawling, bewildering architectural oddity. It is a monument to either madness or a profound, all-consuming fear, a chaotic jumble of Victorian turrets, endless gables, and nonsensical design choices. The Winchester Mystery House is not so much a house as it is a wooden labyrinth, the physical manifestation of one woman's obsession. For 38 years, from 1884 to 1922, the sound of hammers and saws never ceased. The construction was a constant, relentless murmur, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, driven by a terror of the supernatural that bordered on insanity. The house is the bizarre and tragic legacy of Sarah Winchester, the heiress to the vast Winchester Repeating Arms Company fortune, and it is a place built not for the living, but for the dead. Sarah Winchester's life was one of immense privilege and equally immense, soul-crushing tragedy. She was a cultured, intelligent woman, fluent in multiple languages, a gifted musician, and a celebrated beauty in New Haven society. She was married to William Wirt Winchester, the son of the company's founder and the heir to the firearms empire. Their life together should have been a fairy tale, but it became a Gothic horror story. In 1866, their infant daughter, Annie, died of marasmus, a rare childhood illness. The loss devastated Sarah, plunging her into a deep and inconsolable grief from which she would never truly recover. Then, in 1881, her husband, William, succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving her a widow with an inheritance that was almost incomprehensible. She received over $20 million, the equivalent of more than $500 million today, and a 50% stake in the Winchester Company, which meant she earned about $1,000 a day, tax-free. But the fortune was no comfort. It felt, to her, like blood money, each dollar stained with the memory of the countless lives ended by the rifle her family had created. She was alone, adrift in a sea of sorrow, and she began to believe her family was cursed. Seeking answers for the unrelenting tragedy in her life, Sarah, like many grieving Victorians of her time, turned to the burgeoning world of spiritualism. She consulted a well-known spiritualist medium in Boston, who, it is said, channeled the spirit of her late husband, William. The message he delivered was chilling. He claimed that the Winchester family was being haunted by the countless spirits of those who had been killed by the gun that won the West, the famous Winchester rifle. The spirits of slain Native American warriors, of soldiers from both sides of the Civil War, of cowboys and outlaws, all of them were angry, their souls restless, and they sought vengeance on the family who had profited from their deaths. The medium conveyed their warning. Sarah was next. But the spirits had offered a strange and specific path to salvation. She was to move west, find a new home, and begin construction on a great house for herself and for the vengeful dead. She was told that as long as she was building, her life would be spared. But the moment the construction stopped, the spirits would claim her. Terrified and desperate, Sarah Winchester took the medium's warning to heart. She left her home in New Haven, Connecticut, and traveled to the Santa Clara Valley in California. In 1884, she purchased an unfinished, 8-room farmhouse and began her life's strange and obsessive work. She hired teams of carpenters, artisans, and laborers, and for the next 38 years, the sound of construction never stopped. The small farmhouse grew into a sprawling, chaotic mansion, a place of architectural nightmares and bewildering design, a house that seemed to grow organically, like some strange wooden fungus. There were no master blueprints. Sarah herself, it is said, would enter a private room at the heart of the house, known as the Blue Room or the Seance Room, every single night at midnight. A bell would toll to announce the beginning of the seance, and another would ring at 2 a.m. to signal its end. There, she would commune with the spirits, who would give her the building instructions for the following day. She would emerge in the morning with crude, hand-drawn sketches on napkins, tablecloths, or scraps of paper, which she would give to her bewildered but well-paid foreman. The result is a house that defies all logic. It has 160 rooms, including 40 bedrooms, 2 ballrooms, and 47 fireplaces. It has 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, 47 stairways, 17 chimneys, and 13 bathrooms. The number 13 was an obsession for Sarah, a recurring motif meant to appease the spirits. There are chandeliers with 13 candles, clothes hooks in multiples of 13, and a grand staircase with 13 steps. Even her will was divided into 13 parts, which she signed 13 times. The house is a maze of bizarre and often terrifying features, designed, it is believed, to confuse the malevolent spirits that she believed were constantly pursuing her. There are staircases that ascend several flights only to end abruptly at the ceiling. Doors that open onto solid walls, or worse, to a 2-story drop to the garden below. There are tiny, cramped hallways that twist and turn back on themselves, and vast, empty ballrooms that were, according to rumor, never used. There are secret passages behind walls, allowing Sarah, a tiny woman shrouded in black, to move through the house unseen. One staircase, known as the switchback staircase, has 7 flights with a total of 44 steps, but only rises about 9 feet, its tiny 2-inch risers designed to accommodate Sarah's debilitating arthritis. Many of the home's most beautiful features, like its priceless Tiffany stained glass windows, were installed in rooms that received no natural light, their beauty intended only for the eyes of the spirits. Sarah lived as a recluse in her ever-expanding madhouse, a small, solitary figure always dressed in the black mourning clothes of a Victorian widow. She rarely saw visitors, and her staff was instructed to avoid looking at her directly, to simply step aside and face the wall as she approached. Her life was a ritual of construction and communion, her every action dictated by the fear of the spirits she believed were her constant companions. The house was her sanctuary and her prison, a monument to her grief and her terror. The constant hammering finally stopped on September 5, 1922, when Sarah Winchester died in her sleep of heart failure at the age of 82. The moment her death was confirmed, the workers laid down their tools, some leaving nails half-hammered into the walls. Her life's work, and her protection against the spirit world, was over. After her death, the house was open to the public, and the stories of its haunting, once whispered among the staff, began to multiply. The spirits Sarah had tried so desperately to appease were now, it seemed, permanent residents. Visitors and staff have reported a wide range of paranormal phenomena. The most common is the sound of disembodied footsteps, echoing through the empty halls, and the sound of doors slamming shut in the dead of night, even in parts of the house with no drafts. The spirit of Sarah Winchester herself is often seen, a small, veiled figure in black, moving silently through the rooms of her bizarre creation, still overseeing the construction that never ends. One of the most frequently reported ghosts is that of a man with a thick, black mustache, believed to be a former handyman or carpenter named Clyde. He is often seen in the basement, near the coal chute, or in the grand ballroom, pushing a wheelbarrow or appearing to work on the walls, still on duty in the afterlife. Another spirit, a friendly one, is often felt in the kitchen. Staff have reported feeling a gentle, unseen hand on their back, as if being guided or encouraged, and the scent of chicken soup has been known to inexplicably fill the air. The 3rd floor is a particular hotspot for activity. It is a labyrinth of small, dark rooms, and many visitors have reported feeling a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread and panic in this area. They have been touched by unseen hands, heard their names whispered by a disembodied voice, and seen shadowy figures darting in and out of the doorways. One tour guide, leading a group through this section, felt a sharp tug on her watch. She looked down to see that the clasp had been undone and the watch was about to fall off her wrist. No one in the group was close enough to have touched her. In the séance room, visitors have reported feeling a heavy, oppressive energy, and some have even claimed to see the room's single, hanging light fixture begin to sway on its own. Paranormal investigators have found the Winchester Mystery House to be a fertile ground for their work. They have captured numerous EVPs, including the sounds of a woman sighing, a man groaning, a baby crying, and the faint, tinny sound of old-fashioned music playing on a non-existent phonograph. They have photographed strange orbs and mists, particularly in the grand ballroom and near Sarah's bedroom. They have recorded sudden, drastic drops in temperature in rooms with no drafts or windows. The Winchester Mystery House is more than just a tourist attraction. It is a profound and deeply sad monument to one woman's immense grief and her all-consuming fear of the unknown. It is a house built by a tormented soul to house the tormented spirits she believed were her responsibility. Whether the ghosts are real or simply the product of a house designed to disorient and confuse the mind, the feeling of being in the presence of something strange and otherworldly is undeniable. The spirits of the Winchester Mystery House, both the vengeful and the benign, seem to be forever locked within the maze of their strange, beautiful, and terrifying home. There are buildings that absorb sorrow like a sponge. They are built on foundations of pain and watered with tears, their walls saturated with the echoes of human misery. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is such a place. It was not conceived as a place of punishment, but as a grand, revolutionary experiment in social reform, a machine for redemption. When it opened its doors in 1829, it was the most expensive and ambitious public structure ever erected in the United States. Its imposing, castle-like facade and high, Gothic walls designed to inspire awe in the public and terror in the hearts of criminals. Its philosophy, born from the well-intentioned minds of Quaker reformers, was simple but profound. True penitence, they believed, could only be achieved through total, enforced isolation. This was the birth of the Pennsylvania system, a radical new form of incarceration. From the moment an inmate arrived, their identity was stripped away. A heavy, coarse cloth hood was placed over their head, blinding them to the world. They were led through a labyrinth of corridors to their final destination, a small, stone cell with a vaulted ceiling. They would live alone, eat alone, and exercise alone in their own small, high-walled yard, a space they called the cathedral. They were to see no other human face, hear no other human voice, save for the occasional visit from a chaplain or guard. The goal was to force the prisoner inward, to make them confront the enormity of their sins in the crushing, silent solitude of their cell, with only the Bible for a companion. The very architecture was designed to facilitate this divine judgment. The prison's layout, a radical wagon wheel design with 7 cell blocks radiating from a central hub, allowed a single guard to observe hundreds of prisoners without ever being seen. The cells were Spartan, with a single skylight, known as the Eye of God, serving as the only source of light, a constant, unblinking reminder that while they were hidden from man, they were never hidden from their Creator. The reality, however, was a far cry from the utopian ideal. The human mind is not built for such profound sensory deprivation and social isolation. Instead of fostering quiet contemplation, the Pennsylvania system became a potent recipe for madness. The crushing silence, broken only by the clang of a food slot or the distant, muffled sobs of another unseen soul, became a form of exquisite psychological torture. Imagine it, day after day, week after week, with nothing but the 4 walls of your tomb-like cell for company. The initial novelty of solitude would curdle into a gnawing loneliness, then into a frantic, desperate need for any kind of stimulation. Inmates descended into profound insanity, their minds unraveling in the endless quiet. They would babble to themselves for hours, their voices hoarse from disuse. They would bang their heads against the stone walls, the dull thud the only proof they were still alive. Many would sit in a catatonic state for days on end, staring into nothingness, their minds having simply fled their bodies. The grand experiment in reform had become a factory for broken minds, a place that shattered souls more effectively than any physical punishment. The prison's history is a litany of human suffering, not just from the isolation, but from the brutal punishments meted out to those who dared to break the suffocating silence. If an inmate was caught trying to whisper to his neighbor through the heating pipes, he could be sent to the hole, a pitch-black underground cell beneath cell block 14. Down there, in the damp, cold earth, they were left with no light, no human contact, and barely enough bread and water to survive, sometimes for weeks at a time. Another favored punishment was the mad chair, where a prisoner was strapped so tightly into a heavy wooden chair that their circulation was all but cut off, their limbs swelling and turning black, leaving them in excruciating, mind-numbing pain for days. In the winter, unruly inmates were sometimes taken to the central yard, stripped naked, doused with buckets of ice-cold water, and chained to a wall until a shimmering layer of ice formed on their skin. The sheer volume and intensity of the misery contained within Eastern State's high, Gothic walls is almost incomprehensible. For 142 years, the penitentiary housed some of America's most notorious criminals. The bank robber Slick Willie Sutton was here, as was the infamous gangster Al Capone, who served 8 months on a concealed weapon charge. Capone's cell, number 408 in the Park Avenue block, was a testament to his influence. While other men went mad in barren stone cells, Capone's was lavishly furnished with fine rugs, oil paintings, and a grand cabinet radio that filled his solitary world with music. Yet even he was not immune to the prison's oppressive atmosphere. Capone was reportedly terrified during his stay, not of the guards, but of a ghost. He claimed to be haunted nightly by the spirit of James Clark, one of the men he had ordered killed in the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Guards reported hearing Capone screaming in his cell, begging Jimmy to leave him alone. For the vast majority of the 75,000 men, women, and even children who passed through its gates, however, there was no such luxury, only a living hell. It is no surprise, then, that the first reports of paranormal activity began while the prison was still operational. Guards and inmates alike spoke of unsettling, inexplicable events. They heard disembodied footsteps echoing down empty cell blocks, the sound of cell doors rattling when all were secure, and the faint whispers of unseen men in the dead of night. A pervasive feeling of being watched was a common complaint, a sense of unseen eyes following them from the shadowy corners of the long, vaulted corridors. One guard in the 1950s repeatedly saw a solitary figure silhouetted in his guard tower, only to find it completely empty when he went to investigate. When Eastern State Penitentiary finally closed its doors in 1971, it was left to crumble. The massive complex fell into ruin, its cells overgrown with weeds and trees, its paint peeling from the damp walls like sunburnt skin. The silence that had once been enforced by guards was now the silence of abandonment and decay. It became a modern ruin, a haunting, beautiful, and deeply unsettling place. When it reopened as a historic site and museum in the 1990s, the floodgates of paranormal activity seemed to burst open, as if the return of living souls had reawakened the dead. The reports from staff, volunteers, and visitors are as numerous as they are terrifying. Each cell block seems to have its own unique brand of horror. Cell block 12 is known for the sound of disembodied, maniacal laughter that echoes from its empty cells, and for shadowy figures that dart in and out of the doorways in the peripheral vision. One of the most famous stories involves a locksmith named Gary, who was hired to remove a 150-year-old lock from a cell door in this block. As he worked, he claims he was overcome by a terrifying, negative force, a wave of energy so powerful it seemed to physically immobilize him. He saw visions of tormented, screaming faces swirling around him in the dark and felt a palpable sense of pure, ancient evil. He was a changed man after the experience, refusing ever to set foot in that cell block again. Cell block 6 is home to another well-known phenomenon, shadowy figures that appear and disappear, often seen pacing back and forth on the second-tier catwalk as if still serving out their sentence. Many have also reported the distinct feeling of being watched from the guard tower that overlooks the block, even when it is demonstrably empty. In cell block 4, visitors have captured what they claim are ghostly faces peering out from the dark interiors of the cells in their photographs. Disembodied voices are common here, with EVP recordings capturing clear whispers, mournful sighs, and sometimes aggressive commands to get out. The death row block, added later in the prison's history, is said to be home to a constant, giggling sound, a chilling, childlike mirth that is utterly out of place in such a grim location. The prison's hospital wing is another hotspot, where people report hearing the sounds of weeping and seeing apparitions of nurses and doctors from a bygone era. The most intense and frightening activity, however, is consistently reported from the hole and the solitary confinement cells. People who venture into these dark, oppressive spaces report being overcome with feelings of dread, nausea, and despair. Many claim to have been touched, grabbed, or pushed by unseen hands. The anguished cries and tortured moans of long-dead inmates are said to still echo in these chambers of ultimate isolation. Paranormal investigation teams have documented a wealth of evidence over the years. They have recorded video of shadowy masses moving across the screen, audio of cell doors slamming shut on their own, and countless EVPs capturing intelligent, and often aggressive, responses to their questions. One team, investigating the prison's hospital wing, asked if any former doctors were present. A moment later, a clear, disembodied voice was recorded on their equipment, stating curtly, "I'm here." Another investigator, standing in Al Capone's cell, taunted the spirit of Jimmy, and was immediately answered by a guttural whisper on his recorder that said, "Leave." To walk through the crumbling cell blocks of Eastern State Penitentiary today is to walk through a gallery of ghosts. The immense weight of the pain, madness, and despair that was experienced here seems to have been permanently absorbed by the stone and steel. The spirits are not just the lingering souls of men like Capone or Sutton, they are the fragmented, tortured echoes of the thousands of anonymous inmates who lived and died in silence. They are the spectral residue of a grand, failed experiment in human reformation, their silent screams and sorrowful whispers a permanent, chilling testament to the torment of Eastern State. High in the crisp, clean air of the Colorado Rockies, nestled in the scenic valley of Estes Park, stands a majestic white hotel. With its grand Georgian architecture, symmetrical facade, and iconic red roof, the Stanley Hotel is a vision of old-world elegance against a backdrop of untamed, rugged wilderness. It was opened in 1909 by Freeland Oscar Stanley, the brilliant and innovative co-inventor of the Stanley steamer automobile, as a luxurious health retreat for the Gilded Age elite, a grand haven from the grime, pollution, and disease of the industrial cities back east. But behind its stately facade of order and sophistication, the Stanley is a place of profound and unsettling strangeness, a place where the laughter and music of a bygone era still echo in the empty halls, and where the original guests, it seems, have never truly checked out. F.O. Stanley came to the mountains not as a hotelier, but as a man facing his own mortality. In 1903, at the height of his success, he was diagnosed with a severe, life-threatening case of tuberculosis. At the turn of the century, this diagnosis was a death sentence. His doctors in Massachusetts gave him less than 6 months to live, advising him to prepare his affairs. Unwilling to accept his fate, he and his wife, Flora, traveled west, following the common medical wisdom of the day that prescribed fresh, dry mountain air as the only possible cure. They arrived in Estes Park, a remote, sparsely populated valley. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The clean, thin, pine-scented air seemed to breathe new life into his failing lungs. Within a single season, Stanley's health had dramatically improved, his cough subsiding, the color returning to his cheeks. Overjoyed and deeply in love with the rugged beauty of the valley, he vowed to build a magnificent hotel, a palace in the wilderness that would rival the finest resorts of Europe, a place where the wealthy could experience the restorative power of the Rockies in unparalleled comfort. The Stanley Hotel was a marvel of its age, a beacon of modernity in the wilderness. It was one of the first hotels in the country to be fully electric, with its own hydroelectric power plant. It offered its guests every conceivable luxury, including telephones, en-suite bathrooms, a staff of professional servants brought in from the East Coast, and a fleet of Stanley steamer mountain wagons to ferry them from the nearest train station. Flora Stanley, a talented and cultured woman, personally oversaw the creation of the hotel's opulent music room, which would later be renamed the Concert Hall. She had a magnificent Steinway grand piano, serial number 19353, shipped all the way from New York. It was her pride and joy, and the hall became the heart of the hotel's social life, its walls echoing with the sounds of classical music, the rustle of silk gowns, and the polite applause of its well-heeled guests. From the very beginning, there were whispers. Staff would report strange, fleeting occurrences, lights turning on and off by themselves, doors opening and closing in empty hallways, and the faint sound of music coming from the locked concert hall late at night. But these were dismissed as the creaks and groans of a new building settling into its foundation, or tricks of the mountain wind. The true and undeniable haunting of the Stanley began on a stormy night in June of 1911, an event that would cement the hotel's paranormal reputation forever. The hotel had recently installed a volatile gas lighting system as a backup to its then unreliable electrical grid. A powerful summer thunderstorm rolled down from the mountains, knocking out the electricity. As the staff scurried to light the gas lamps, the head chambermaid, a woman named Elizabeth Wilson, entered room 217, which at the time was the presidential suite. Unbeknownst to her, a significant gas leak had filled the room with flammable fumes. As she entered with a lit candle, the room erupted in a massive explosion. The blast was so powerful it blew out the entire floor of the room, sending Wilson, the bed, and all the furniture crashing down into the McGregor dining room below. Miraculously, she survived the fall, though she suffered 2 broken ankles and a lifetime of trauma from the event. Ever the gracious host, F.O. Stanley paid for all her medical care and, upon her recovery, gave her a job for life as the head chambermaid. Elizabeth Wilson worked at the Stanley until her death in the 1950s, a loyal and fastidious employee to the very end. It is in room 217 that the Stanley's most famous and persistent haunting occurs. But the spirit of Elizabeth Wilson is not a terrifying one. She is, it seems, still on duty. Guests who stay in the room report a variety of strange, benign activities that suggest a spectral housekeeper at work. Unmarried couples have reported waking up to find a cold, unseen force separating them in the bed, a spectral chaperone enforcing old-fashioned morality from beyond the grave. Luggage is often found inexplicably unpacked, with clothes neatly folded and put away in the drawers. Lights will turn on and off for no reason, and a chill will often pass through the room, as if someone has just walked past. Elizabeth, it seems, is a very proper and diligent ghost, forever tending to the room that nearly claimed her life. The hotel's fortunes declined after F.O. Stanley's death in 1940. It fell into a state of disrepair, a faded beauty queen living on memories, its grand halls mostly empty. It was in this state of genteel decay that the hotel found its second, more famous life. In 1974, a young horror writer named Stephen King and his wife, Tabitha, checked into the nearly empty hotel for a one-night stay at the very end of the season. They were the only registered guests. That night, as a brutal winter storm held outside, King experienced a series of unsettling events that would become the basis for one of the most famous horror novels of all time. They ate alone in the vast dining room, the only table not covered in a white sheet. He wandered the long, eerily silent corridors, feeling an oppressive sense of isolation. Later, at the bar, he was served by a bartender named Grady. That night, he had a terrifying nightmare about his young son being chased through the hotel's endless corridors by a possessed fire hose. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, and went to the balcony for a cigarette. As he stood there, looking out at the snow-swept mountains, the plot for his next novel, The Shining, came to him in its entirety. The Stanley Hotel had given him the overlook, and the world of horror would never be the same. King's novel, and the subsequent film adaptations, brought a new wave of international attention to the Stanley, and with it, a new awareness of its resident spirits. The paranormal activity, once the stuff of local legend, became a global phenomenon. The fourth floor, which was once the servants' quarters and a makeshift dormitory for the children of guests, is particularly active. The sounds of children running, laughing, and playing are heard at all hours of the night, their phantom footfalls echoing down the hallway. Guests have reported the feeling of a small hand tugging on their clothes, only to turn and find no one there, or the sight of child-sized indentations appearing on the beds in their otherwise empty rooms. These are believed to be the spirits of children who may have died of disease or exposure in the area's early, harsh days, forever at play in their mountain retreat. The ghost of F.O. Stanley himself is often seen, a distinguished, spectral figure in a dark suit and bowler hat, overseeing the operations of his beloved hotel. He is most frequently spotted in the lobby and the billiards room, his favorite haunt in life, where the scent of cherry pipe tobacco sometimes hangs in the air. The scent of his wife Flora's rose perfume is also often detected, and she is said to be the ghostly pianist who still plays the Steinway in the concert hall. Staff have locked the hall for the night, only to be drawn back by the sound of classical music drifting from within. When they unlock the doors, the music abruptly stops, and the room is found to be empty, a deep silence hanging in the air where moments before there was a spectral concert. The concert hall has a darker presence as well. In the basement beneath the stage, a spirit known as Paul is said to linger. Paul was a handyman and groundskeeper who, in the hotel's early days, was tasked with enforcing the strict 11 p.m. curfew. He was known for his foul temper, and he seems to have carried it with him into the afterlife. He is not a friendly ghost. Both staff and paranormal investigators have reported being forcefully told to get out by a gruff, disembodied voice when they are in the basement after hours. Tools are often thrown across the room, and a general feeling of aggressive, territorial energy pervades the space. Room 401 is said to be haunted by the spirit of Lord Dunraven, the Anglo-Irish Earl who owned the land before F.O. Stanley. He was not a pleasant man, known for his womanizing and for cheating at cards. Guests in this room, which was once his private quarters, have reported their belongings being stolen, the sound of a man whispering angrily in the closet, and the deeply unsettling feeling of unseen hands touching them in their sleep. The Stanley Hotel today fully embraces its haunted reputation. It offers nightly ghost tours and hosts paranormal conferences, its hallways filled with amateur ghost hunters armed with EMF meters and digital recorders. But the spirits of the Stanley are not just a tourist attraction. They are a living, breathing part of the hotel's history. They are the echoes of a grander time, the spectral residue of the lives, loves, and tragedies that played out within its elegant walls. To stay at the Stanley is to be a guest not just of the hotel, but of its permanent residents, the ghosts who wander its halls, forever a part of the grand, haunted palace in the mountains. She floats silently now, a colossal gray ghost moored at a pier in Alameda, California, her dormant engines and silent decks a stark contrast to her violent, storied past. The USS Hornet, CV-12, is a titan of a bygone era, an Essex-class aircraft carrier that carved her name into the annals of American naval history with steel, fire, and blood. Commissioned in 1943, in the crucible of World War II, she was a floating city of steel, a hornet's nest of fighter planes and brave, often terrified, young men. She was born into conflict and christened in loss. Her predecessor, the CV-8, was sunk at the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands, and this new Hornet was destined to avenge her. She served with unparalleled distinction in the Pacific Theater, participating in legendary engagements like the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where her pilots helped decimate the Japanese Naval Air Force. Her planes downed over 1,400 enemy aircraft and destroyed more than 1.2 million tons of enemy shipping. Her crew, with a mixture of skill, grit, and sheer luck, survived 59 separate attacks without a single direct hit from a bomb, torpedo, or kamikaze plane. This uncanny ability to evade destruction earned her the nickname the Grey Ghost, a testament to her knack for striking and vanishing before the enemy knew what hit them. But the Hornet is a vessel that has seen more than her share of death, and this is where her haunting truly begins. The life of a carrier crewman in wartime was one of constant, heart-pounding danger. Men were lost to horrific flight deck accidents, ripped apart by the whirling blades of propellers, crushed by landing aircraft that missed the arresting cables, or incinerated in fiery crashes that turned cockpits into tombs. Below decks, the labyrinth of steel corridors was its own kind of hell. Men died in machinery accidents, were scalded by steam from burst pipes, or electrocuted by faulty wiring. The ship also endured one of the highest suicide rates in the entire U.S. Navy, the immense psychological stress of combat and the profound isolation of life at sea taking a brutal toll. In her long and decorated career, which also included service in the Vietnam War and the historic recovery of the Apollo 11 and 12 astronauts, more than 300 men lost their lives on or near the USS Hornet. Their blood and their sorrow have seeped into the very steel of the ship. Today, the Hornet is a museum, her decks silent, her catapults cold. But many believe that the ship is still crewed by the spirits of the men who served, fought, and died within her gray hull. She is widely considered to be one of the most haunted warships in the world, a place where the echoes of a violent past refuse to fade. The sheer volume and consistency of paranormal activity reported by staff, volunteers, and visitors is staggering, creating a chilling portrait of a ship that cannot rest. The flight deck, once the chaotic, roaring heart of the ship, is now one of its most haunted and exposed locations. It was a place of incredible, orchestrated danger, where a single misstep could mean a gruesome, instantaneous death. Visitors and docents often see the full-bodied apparition of a sailor in his dress whites, a spectral figure who walks the length of the deck with a purpose, as if on patrol, before dematerializing into thin air near the ship's edge. Others have felt a sudden, inexplicable gust of wind, as if from a propeller, on a perfectly still day, strong enough to knock off a hat. The most chilling phenomenon, however, is the sound of planes that are no longer there. People have heard the distinct, deafening roar of Hellcat propellers, the high-pitched screech of tires on the deck, and the thunderous, gut-wrenching crash of a landing gone wrong, all on a deck that has been empty and silent for decades. The ship's interior is a claustrophobic labyrinth of narrow corridors and cramped compartments, a world of cold, gray steel that seems to amplify the sense of being watched. The sounds of life from the ship's heyday are a common, and deeply unsettling, occurrence. Heavy, watertight doors and hatches, which require significant force to move, have been seen to swing open and slam shut on their own. The metallic clatter of tools can be heard from empty engine rooms, as if a phantom crew is still making repairs. The sounds of men talking, shouting, and even laughing echo from unoccupied mess halls, creating the eerie feeling of walking through a party that only the dead can see. One of the most common reports is the smell of old-fashioned Navy coffee and pungent cherry pipe tobacco wafting from the Admiral's Bridge, even when the compartment is empty and locked. Certain areas of the ship are known for their particularly intense, and often malevolent, activity. The forecastle, or FOCSLE, located at the very front of the ship, is a hotspot of palpable dread. It was here that the anchor chains, each iron link weighing over 100 pounds, were housed. Working with this massive, powerful machinery was a perilous job, and several men were killed here, crushed between the chains or dismembered when a cable snapped. Today, it is a place of profound cold and oppressive sadness. People report hearing the disembodied, blood-curdling screams of men in agony, and many have been overcome with a sudden, debilitating sense of dread that forces them to flee the area, gasping for air. The sick bay, or medical ward, is another deeply unsettling location. It was here that the ship's doctors and medics fought a constant, often losing, battle to save the lives of grievously wounded men. The ghosts of both patients and medical staff are said to linger here, locked in an eternal cycle of suffering and care. The apparition of a nurse in a vintage uniform has been seen moving silently between the empty beds, forever tending to her phantom patients. The sounds of men groaning in pain are often heard, and some visitors have reported feeling a cold, spectral hand touch their own, as if seeking comfort in their final moments. Surgical instruments have been known to rattle in their trays, and the feeling of being watched by unseen, suffering eyes is almost unbearable. The ship's mess decks and crew quarters are also hives of paranormal activity. In the cramped, stacked berthing compartments, known as coffin racks, sailors have reported seeing shadowy figures sitting on the empty bunks, only to have them vanish when a light is turned on. Others have felt their own bunks shake violently in the middle of the night, as if someone were trying to wake them for watch duty. In the mess hall, spectral sailors in uniform have been seen sitting at the tables, their forms misty and indistinct, engaged in a silent, ghostly meal, their conversations unheard by the living. Paranormal investigators have captured a wealth of evidence aboard the Hornet. They have recorded numerous EVPs, capturing everything from simple, one-word responses to full, conversational sentences. One investigator, asking who was present in the sick bay, recorded a clear, weary voice saying, "So many." Another team, exploring the engine room, captured the sound of a man whistling a jaunty, old-fashioned tune, a phantom melody in the heart of the machine. They have also documented tools and other objects moving on their own, wrenches sliding off tables and falling to the floor with a loud clang. They have captured photographs and videos of shadowy figures and strange, unexplained mists that seem to have a life of their own. One of the most frequently seen apparitions is that of an officer in his khaki uniform, who appears at the end of a long corridor, observes the living for a moment, and then turns and walks through a solid steel bulkhead. The USS Hornet is more than just a museum. It is a floating tomb, a massive steel memorial to the hundreds of men who gave their lives in service to their country. Their spirits, it seems, have never left their post. They are a part of the ship, their energy, their discipline, and their stories forever bound to the cold, gray steel of the Gray Ghost. To walk her decks is to be surrounded by the unseen crew, the sailors of the past who still haunt the long, lonely corridors of their final, eternal home. The San Diego air, usually so warm and forgiving, carried a distinct, briny chill as Thomas Whaley stood on the plot of land he had just purchased. It was 1855, a time of booming optimism in what was still very much a frontier town, but this particular piece of ground felt different. It was tainted. The local Kumeyaay people avoided it, murmuring about bad ground, a place where the earth held on to sorrow. It was here, just 3 years prior, that the infamous James Yankee Jim Robinson had met his end. Yankee Jim was a notorious figure, a big, brawling man with a magnetic charm that could curdle into menace in a heartbeat. He'd been convicted of grand larceny for stealing a pilot boat, but many whispered his true crimes were far darker. The gallows had been a crude affair, hastily erected on the back of a wagon, a makeshift stage for a grim public spectacle. The townsfolk had gathered, a mixture of grim satisfaction and morbid curiosity. Yankee Jim was a tall man, well over 6 feet, and the hangman had misjudged the drop. When the wagon was pulled away, it was not the swift, neck-snapping death the crowd expected. Instead, his boots scraped against the wagon's edge, his long legs dangling just high enough that his toes could brush the dusty ground. The crowd fell silent, the festive atmosphere turning to one of abject horror as Yankee Jim began to strangle, his face turning a ghastly purple, his body convulsing in a desperate, silent dance of death that seemed to stretch for an eternity. The townsfolk who had watched spoke of it in hushed, haunted tones for weeks afterward. The image of his slow, agonizing death burned into their collective memory. Thomas Whaley, a shrewd and pragmatic businessman from New York, was not a man given to flights of fancy or superstition. He had built his fortune on logic and foresight, not on heeding the ghost stories of provincial townsfolk. He dismissed the lingering tales as macabre folklore, the morbid embellishments of an uneducated populace. The land was cheap, its location at the edge of New Town was perfect for the grand general store and family home he envisioned. He would construct a handsome, 2-story brick edifice in the Greek Revival style, a testament to his success and a beacon of Eastern civilization in the dusty, burgeoning city. He would not be deterred by the grim history of the soil beneath his feet. "Nonsense," he'd mutter to himself, though sometimes, when standing on the property alone at twilight, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Construction began in 1856, and almost immediately, the strange occurrences started, seeming to seep from the disturbed earth itself. Workers, hardened men accustomed to the rigors of the frontier, grew uneasy. They reported the distinct sound of heavy, booted footsteps echoing across the upper floor joists when no one was up there. Tools would vanish from where they were left, only to reappear in another room, often placed neatly in the center of the floor as if presented for discovery. A carpenter, balanced on a ladder, swore he felt a cold hand press firmly into the small of his back, nearly sending him tumbling. A cold spot, a pocket of air that seemed to defy the blistering California sun, lingered near the back of the building, precisely where the gallows had stood. It was a palpable presence. To step into it was to feel the warmth instantly leached from your skin, the air growing thick and heavy in your lungs. Thomas's wife, Anna, a woman of grace and delicate sensibilities, felt it most acutely. She often spoke of a profound sadness that seemed to emanate from the very walls, a sense of oppressive despair that had no discernible source. "This house has a sorrow built into its bones, Thomas," she would say, her eyes troubled. "It's just the house settling, my dear," Thomas would reply, his voice firm, trying to reassure both her and himself. But in the dead of night, when the coastal wind howled like a mourner and the floorboards creaked under an invisible weight, even he felt a prickle of profound unease. The heavy footsteps he now heard himself, pacing the hallway outside their bedroom, did not sound like settling wood. They sounded like a man pacing his cage. The house was completed in 1857, and it was a marvel, the finest private residence in Southern California. The ground floor housed Whaley's bustling general store, stocked with everything from silk and spices to hardware and fine wines. The family lived upstairs in finely appointed rooms filled with elegant furniture and the laughter of their children. For a time, life was good. The Whaleys were prominent citizens, their home a hub of social activity. They had 6 children, and their vibrant energy, for a while, seemed to chase away the inherent gloom of the house. But the house held its breath, waiting. The first true tragedy struck with unbearable swiftness in 1858. Their son, Thomas Jr., just 18 months old, was struck down by scarlet fever. His happy gurgles turned to pained cries, his skin burning with fever. In the days before modern medicine, there was nothing they could do but hold him, their hearts breaking with every ragged breath he took. He died in the upstairs nursery, and a piece of Anna's spirit died with him. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a permanent shadow of grief. After his death, the disembodied footsteps were now often accompanied by the faint, heartbreaking sound of a baby crying or a soft lullaby being hummed in an empty room. Anna would rush to the nursery, her heart pounding with a desperate, impossible hope, only to find it empty, the cradle still and cold. The years that followed were a mixture of prosperity and sorrow. The house, in its central role, served not only as a home and store but also as San Diego's first commercial theater and the county courthouse. The courtroom was established on the 2nd floor, and the hum of legal proceedings filled the daytime hours. But at night, the house belonged to its other occupants. Lawyers working late would speak of seeing a tall, shadowy figure lingering near the judge's bench, a hulking silhouette that would vanish when approached. The air would grow cold, and a faint scent of stale whiskey and despair would hang in the air. Many believed it was the restless spirit of Yankee Jim, a spectral prisoner in the court that operated above his grave, forever bound to the place of his unjust and brutal end. The weight of the house's sorrow seemed to fall most heavily on the Whaley children who survived. Violet, a beautiful and vivacious young woman, fell deeply in love with a charming and handsome man who, it turned out, was a silver-tongued con artist. He married her, but it was a sham. He was after her dowry and disappeared shortly after the wedding, leaving her not only heartbroken but publicly humiliated. In the rigid society of the 19th century, this was a devastating blow. Violet was consumed by a deep depression, a suffocating melancholy that the house seemed to feed and amplify, its own inherent sadness merging with hers. She would spend hours staring out the window, a ghost in her own home. On August 18, 1885, at the age of 22, Violet Whaley took her own life. She shot herself in the chest with her father's heavy pistol in a downstairs room. Her suicide note spoke of a heart crushed and broken. The sound of the shot echoed through the house, a final, tragic punctuation mark in its history of grief. After Violet's death, the house became a place of almost unbearable sorrow. The family's fortunes had also declined, and in 1885, Thomas Whaley moved his family to a new home, leaving the brick house on San Diego Avenue to its ghosts. But they couldn't escape it entirely. They still owned the property, and their lives remained entwined with its fate. Thomas Whaley died in 1890, his final years spent in financial difficulty and ill health. Anna lived on, a matriarch presiding over a family of ghosts, and eventually moved back into the old house with her surviving children. They were specters themselves, haunted by the memories of those they had lost. After Anna's death in 1913, the house fell into disrepair. It was rented out to various tenants, but no one ever stayed long. The stories of paranormal activity intensified. Visitors and residents alike reported a litany of chilling phenomena. The scent of Anna Whaley's lavender perfume would suddenly fill a room, thick and sweet, only to vanish moments later. The tinkling of a piano would be heard playing a somber tune, though the instrument was old and its keys were locked. A small, spectral dog, believed to be the Whaley's fox terrier, Dolly, was often seen and heard, its phantom claws clicking on the wooden floors before it would dart through the garden. In the 1960s, the house was officially designated as a historic landmark and open to the public as a museum. The decision seemed to awaken the spirits even more, as if the renewed attention gave them strength. Docents and visitors regularly reported seeing the full-bodied apparition of Thomas Whaley himself, a distinguished figure in a dark frock coat and top hat, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down with a stern, proprietary air as if judging the new crowd in his home. The ghostly image of Anna Whaley was often seen in the downstairs parlor or her beloved garden, a silent, sorrowful sentinel forever tending to her home. Perhaps the most compelling evidence came from the museum staff. One evening, a curator was locking up. As he walked through the darkened courtroom, he heard the distinct sound of a gavel striking the judge's bench, 3 sharp, authoritative raps. He froze, his heart hammering. He was alone. Peering into the pitch-black room, he saw nothing. But as he turned to leave, he heard it again, closer this time, a definitive rap that echoed with an undeniable sense of judgment. Another time, a young guide was in the nursery telling a tour group about Thomas Jr. when a child in the group, no older than 5, began to giggle. "He likes you," the child said, pointing to the empty cradle. The guide asked who he was talking about. "The baby," the boy said matter-of-factly. "He's standing up in the crib, and he's laughing." The phenomena were not always so benign. Some visitors reported feeling an unseen hand brush against their arm, a cold, lingering touch. Others claimed to have been pushed or shoved by an unseen force on the stairs. The spirit of Yankee Jim, it was said, was not a friendly one. He resented the house built over his grave, and he made his displeasure known. One skeptical paranormal investigator, armed with the latest technology, decided to spend a night in the house, determined to debunk the stories. He set up his equipment, infrared cameras, digital audio recorders, electromagnetic field detectors. For hours, all was quiet. He documented the creaks of the old house, the sigh of the wind. Then, around 3 a.m., the time when the veil between worlds is said to be at its thinnest, he heard it. The sound of a man struggling to breathe, a desperate, rasping gasp that seemed to come from all around him. The temperature in the room plummeted more than 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. His equipment went haywire, batteries draining instantly. He felt a pressure build in the room, an intense feeling of malevolence. Then, he heard a low, guttural whisper, right next to his ear, a voice full of gravel and hate. A single word, get. He fled the house, leaving his expensive equipment behind, and never returned. Today, the Whaley House stands as a silent monument to a family's tragedy and a city's dark history. It is a place where the veil is thin, where the past is not just remembered, but palpably, chillingly, present. To walk through its rooms is to walk through a living history, a place where the laughter of children, the tears of a grieving mother, and the final, desperate struggle of a condemned man all linger in the quiet corners and shadowy hallways. They are forever bound to the brick and mortar, their sorrows and their lives etched into the very soul of the house on San Diego Avenue. And they wait, patiently, for the next visitor to come and listen to their stories. She is the last of her kind, a grand dame of the sea now permanently berthed in Long Beach, California, her elegant black hull and 3 iconic red funnels a striking silhouette against the modern skyline. The RMS Queen Mary is more than just a retired ocean liner, she is a floating palace, a time capsule from the golden age of transatlantic travel, and according to many, one of the most haunted places on Earth. Launched in 1936, she was the epitome of Art Deco luxury and engineering, a vessel that carried Hollywood stars like Greta Garbo and Clark Gable, world leaders like Winston Churchill, and wealthy industrialists across the Atlantic in unparalleled style. But her glamorous history is shadowed by a darker, more violent side. During World War II, she was stripped of her finery, painted a drab, menacing camouflage gray, and rechristened the Grey Ghost. She became the largest and fastest troopship in the world, capable of carrying up to 16,000 soldiers at a time, a vital instrument of war. It was during these dangerous war years, and in the decades of service that followed, that the Queen Mary became a vessel of death, her decks and corridors absorbing the energy of countless tragedies. At least 49 souls are officially recorded to have perished aboard her, though many believe the true number is far higher. It is these tragedies, and the spirits they left behind, that now define the ship as much as her elegant design. The ship's transformation into a troop carrier was swift and brutal. The priceless, exotic wood veneers, intricate carvings, and plush Axminster carpets were all stripped out and replaced with cold, hard steel bunks stacked high in every available space. The grand ballrooms and elegant lounges became massive mess halls and crowded, stuffy dormitories. Her new mission was to outrun the German U-boats that hunted in wolf packs across the Atlantic, and her incredible speed, capable of sustaining over 28 knots, made her an elusive target. Hitler himself offered a bounty for the captain who could sink her. But the danger was ever present. The threat of a torpedo strike was a constant source of terror for the thousands of young, seasick soldiers crammed into her hull, a city of men afloat on a deadly sea. The Grey Ghost was a ship at war, and the atmosphere was one of high-stakes tension, fear, and the ever-present specter of a watery grave. The most catastrophic event in the Queen Mary's history, a moment of horror that would forever haunt her, occurred on October 2, 1942, off the coast of Ireland. The ship was carrying over 10,000 American troops and was sailing in a strategic zigzag pattern to evade U-boats. She was being escorted by one of her light cruisers, the much smaller HMS Curacao. Due to a tragic and still debated miscalculation in the zigzag maneuver, the Queen Mary, a vessel of over 81,000 tons, plowed directly into the Curacao, slicing through the smaller ship like a knife through butter. The sound was a sickening, grinding tear of metal. The Curacao was cut in two and sank in a matter of minutes, taking 338 of her crew with her into the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic. Due to the strict orders not to stop for any reason, for fear of U-boat attacks, the Queen Mary could not pause to rescue the survivors. The crew and soldiers on the massive troopship could only watch in horror as the men of the Curacao struggled and screamed in the waves, their desperate cries lost in the Queen Mary's powerful wake. It was a horrifying, traumatic event, and it is believed to have left a profound psychic scar on the ship. To this day, people on the stern of the Queen Mary report hearing the sounds of rushing water, the tearing and groaning of metal, and the faint, desperate cries of drowning men carried on the ocean wind. Some have even reported seeing the apparitions of desperate, soaked men reaching up as if begging for help from a ship that could not save them. After the war, the Queen Mary was refitted and returned to her life as a luxury liner, her decks once again filled with the sounds of laughter and champagne toasts. But the ghosts of her past seemed to have come with her. And new tragedies would add to their number. The ship's engine room, a sweltering, noisy world of powerful machinery deep within the hull, was a particularly dangerous place. During a routine drill in 1966, a young 18-year-old crewman named John Petter was crushed to death by one of the massive, automated watertight doors, known as Door 13, in the ship's firebox. It is his spirit that is most frequently encountered in the engine room. He is often seen as a young man in blue overalls, his face smudged with grease, walking the narrow corridors before vanishing near the very door that killed him. Staff have reported feeling a sudden cold spot, hearing the sound of someone running behind them, and finding greasy handprints on freshly painted surfaces in that area. The door itself is known to open and close on its own, its heavy mechanism grinding in the silence, a chilling reenactment of Petter's final moments. The ship's 2 swimming pools are also notorious hotspots of paranormal activity. The first-class swimming pool, a stunning Art Deco masterpiece now drained and silent, is far from quiet. It is said to be haunted by the spirits of several people who drowned there over the years, including a young girl named Jackie. Visitors often hear the distinct sounds of splashing and see wet footprints appearing on the dry tiles around the pool's edge, only to evaporate moments later. The ghost of Jackie is often heard giggling, humming, or calling out for her mother in a clear, childlike voice. Some have even seen the faint, spectral image of a young girl in a 1930s-style bathing suit, her form shimmering in the dim light before she darts away into the shadows. In the changing rooms, a more aggressive presence is felt. People have reported hearing low, menacing growls, seeing shadowy figures lurk in the corners, and even being scratched by an unseen force, leaving red welts on their skin. The second-class pool is said to be haunted by the spirit of another young girl who drowned, and by a more malevolent entity that lurks in the darker corners of the room. The ship's staterooms, particularly those on B deck, are home to numerous spirits. One of the most active and terrifying is stateroom B340. The room has been the source of so many disturbing reports, from blankets being ripped off sleeping guests by an unseen force, to the faucets in the bathroom turning on full blast by themselves, to a dark, menacing figure seen standing in the corner of the room, that it was eventually stripped of its furnishings and is no longer rented out to the public. It is believed to be haunted by the spirit of a man who was murdered there, his rage and confusion still palpable. The activity is so intense and often malevolent that even seasoned paranormal investigators are hesitant to spend the night alone in the room. They report sudden drops in temperature, feelings of intense nausea, and have captured EVPs of a deep, angry voice telling them to get out. The Queen's Salon, once the ship's grand ballroom, is home to one of the ship's most elegant ghosts, the Lady in White. She is often seen as a beautiful young woman in a flowing white evening gown from the 1930s, dancing alone and without music in the center of the room before fading away. No one knows who she was in life, but her graceful, melancholic spirit is one of the ship's most iconic and frequently reported apparitions. The list of hauntings goes on. After her retirement in 1967, the Queen Mary was permanently moored in Long Beach and converted into a floating hotel and museum. The renovation and the constant presence of new people seemed to amplify the paranormal activity to an unprecedented level. The sounds of a baby crying are often heard from the now empty third-class nursery. The ghost of a man in a 1930s-style suit, believed to be a purser who was murdered for his takings, has been seen in the ship's offices, his apparition still counting his spectral money. The spectral image of a woman with long, dark hair has been seen in the ship's observation bar, and the sounds of a party in full swing, music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, are often heard from the empty veranda grill late at night, a phantom gala that never ends. One of the ship's kitchens is said to be haunted by the ghost of a chef who was, according to legend, cooked in his own oven by mutinous troops during the war. Staff have reported pots and pans flying off the shelves and the terrifying sound of a man screaming in agony. To explore the Queen Mary today is to step into a world where the past and present collide. It is a vessel saturated with the emotional residue of joy, fear, glamour, and profound tragedy. The ghosts of the Queen Mary are not just stories, they are a part of the ship's very fabric. They are the soldiers who never made it home, the crewmen who met a tragic end, and the wealthy passengers who loved the ship so much, they decided to never leave. The gray ghost may have retired from service, but her spectral crew is still on duty, forever sailing the dark, silent waters of the afterlife. Beneath a canopy of ancient, moss-draped live oaks that drip with Spanish moss like gray, skeletal fingers, stands the Myrtles Plantation in the humid heart of St. Francisville, Louisiana. From a distance, it is the perfect picture of antebellum elegance, a graceful home with a sprawling 125-foot veranda, intricate cast-iron work, and a welcoming, pineapple-adorned frieze meant to symbolize hospitality. But this hospitality extends to guests from beyond the grave. A closer look, a deeper breath of the heavy air, reveals a place where the sweet scent of magnolias mingles with the faint, metallic odor of old blood and sorrow. The Myrtles is often called one of America's most haunted homes, and for good reason. It is a place built, as legend has it, over a Native American Tunica burial ground, a house whose very foundations are steeped in a history of slavery, murder, lust, and a lingering, vengeful darkness. At least 10 murders are said to have occurred here, though historical records can only confirm one. The rest belong to the realm of whispers, of stories passed down in the oppressive Louisiana heat, tales that have given the plantation its chilling and enduring reputation. The story most often told, the one that whispers on the lips of every tour guide and intrigues every visitor, is the tragic tale of Chloe. The legend, though disputed by historians, is a powerful one. Chloe was an enslaved woman on the plantation, owned by Clark and Sarah Woodruff in the early 1800s. She was also, it is said, Clark's unwilling mistress, forced into a relationship by the absolute power he held over her. The story goes that Clark Woodruff, a man of fickle appetites, eventually grew tired of her and cast her aside for another. Chloe, terrified of being sent from the relative comfort of the main house to the brutal, backbreaking labor of the sugar cane fields, began to eavesdrop on the family's private conversations, desperate for any information about her fate. One day, Clark caught her listening at his study door. In a fit of rage, and as a barbaric lesson to the other enslaved people, he had one of her ears cut off. From that day forward, she wore a green turban wrapped tightly around her head to hide the gruesome, weeping scar. Chloe's punishment only fueled her desperation, which curdled into a dangerous, ill-conceived plan for revenge, or so the story goes. She did not intend to kill, only to make the family sick so that she, with her knowledge of local herbs, could nurse them back to health and thus secure her indispensable position in the household. For a birthday celebration for one of the Woodruff children, Chloe baked a cake. Into the rich batter, she mixed a small handful of crushed oleander leaves, a beautiful flowering plant that grows in abundance on the plantation grounds and is highly poisonous. Her plan went horribly wrong. The poison was far more potent and fast-acting than she had anticipated. The master, Clark Woodruff, was the only one who didn't eat a slice. But his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young daughters, did. They fell violently ill, racked with convulsions and excruciating pain. Within hours, they were dead. Panic and terror swept through the plantation. The other enslaved people, fearing the unholy wrath that would fall upon them all and knowing Chloe was responsible, allegedly dragged her from her quarters. They enacted their own swift and brutal justice, hanging her from one of the massive oaks in the yard. To ensure her spirit could never rest and to hide the evidence of their deed, her body was then cut down, weighted with stones, and thrown into the murky, swirling waters of the nearby Mississippi River. It is Chloe's spirit that is most famously associated with the Myrtles. She is said to be the figure in the green turban, a sorrowful, restless apparition often seen wandering the veranda or appearing in the dead of night at the foot of guests' beds. Her face, etched with eternal regret, is a common sight for those who are brave enough to spend the night. Sometimes she is seen in the dining room, the place where her tragic plan reached its fatal conclusion, her spectral form lingering as if waiting to be forgiven. But Chloe is far from the only ghost said to walk the halls of the Myrtles. The house seems to be a crowded nexus of restless spirits, a place where tragedy has left an indelible stain. Perhaps the most compelling and famous piece of physical evidence for the haunting is a large, ornate mirror that hangs in the main foyer. Imported from France in 1820, its gilded frame is a thing of beauty, but its surface is clouded and marked with strange, handprint-like smudges and drip marks that cannot be cleaned away, no matter how hard the staff may try. It is believed that this mirror holds the trapped spirits of Sarah Woodruff and her 2 children. According to Creole tradition, mirrors were covered after a death to prevent the souls of the deceased from being trapped inside on their journey to the afterlife. In the chaos following the poisoning, this particular mirror, it is said, was overlooked. Guests and employees have frequently photographed the mirror, and in the developed pictures, eerie, indistinct faces and the small, ghostly handprints of children often appear, spectral images superimposed over the reflections of the living. Another prominent and historically verified ghost is that of William Drew Winter, a lawyer who owned the plantation from 1865 to 1871. In 1871, a man on horseback rode up to the house and called Winter out onto the front porch. After a brief, heated exchange, the stranger drew a pistol and shot Winter in the chest. Mortally wounded, Winter staggered back into the house, his one thought to reach his wife, Sarah, and his family upstairs. He made it only as far as the 17th step of the grand staircase before he collapsed and died in his wife's arms. To this day, visitors and staff often hear the heavy, agonizing, wet-sounding footsteps of a man staggering up those stairs, followed by a final, shuddering thud on that 17th step. In the quiet of the night, some have even heard a disembodied voice cry out his wife's name in a desperate, gurgling gasp. The ghosts of the Woodruff children are also frequently encountered. Their playful, giggling spirits are said to inhabit the ballroom, which was later converted into the master bedroom. Guests staying in this room have reported being awakened by the distinct sensation of a child jumping on their bed, feeling the mattress depress beside them, only to open their eyes and find the room empty. Others have heard the sound of children running and playing in the hallways, their laughter echoing from another time. A grand piano in the parlor is said to play the same melancholy tune over and over again, by itself, its keys moving under invisible fingers. When a visiting paranormal team investigated, they found that the piano would only play when they were not in the room. The moment they entered, the music would abruptly stop, plunging the room into a heavy silence. The grounds of the plantation are no less haunted than the house itself. The ghost of a young girl in an antebellum dress who died of yellow fever in the 1800s is said to appear near the pond, a sad, lonely figure. Spectral figures of enslaved workers have been seen moving silently through the fields at dusk, their forms misty and indistinct, forever tending to the land where they toiled, bled, and died, their own stories lost to time but their spiritual energy forever bound to the soil. Over the years, countless paranormal investigators have studied the Myrtles, and many have left with what they believe is irrefutable proof of the supernatural. They have captured EVPs of children's voices asking to play, a woman humming a sorrowful lullaby, and a man calling for help near the infamous 17th step. Thermal cameras have detected cold spots that move through the rooms, and full-bodied apparitions have been captured on film. One famous photograph, taken by the plantation's owner in the 1990s as part of an insurance assessment, appears to show the transparent, shadowy figure of a girl with curly hair standing between two of the buildings, a figure that has since been dubbed the Ghost Girl of the Myrtles. To stay at the Myrtles Plantation is to immerse oneself in a world where the past is not dead. As William Faulkner wrote, it isn't even past. It is a place of profound, haunting beauty, but it is a beauty that is underscored by a deep and abiding sadness. The spirits of Chloe, the Woodruffs, William Winter, and the many others who lived and died on this land seem to be locked in a perpetual cycle of their own tragedies, their stories replaying for any who are willing to watch and listen. The rustle of the oak leaves in the humid Louisiana breeze might just be the whisper of a ghost, and the reflection you catch in the mirror might not be your own. There are places on earth where the veil between worlds feels thin, where the echoes of the past are not whispers, but screams. The battlefield of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, is perhaps the most profound of these places in America. For 3 brutal, sun-scorched days in July of 1863, this quiet farming community was transformed into the epicenter of a nation's agony. It was the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War, a maelstrom of cannon fire, musket volleys, and desperate, hand-to-hand combat that left over 51,000 men killed, wounded, missing, or captured. The sheer scale of the suffering was apocalyptic. The fields were soaked with the blood of a generation, the air thick with the stench of death. When the armies finally marched away, they left behind a landscape of unimaginable horror, and, it is believed, thousands of restless souls. The Battle of Gettysburg may have ended, but the haunting was just beginning. In the aftermath of the battle, the small town of 2,400 residents was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of human misery. Every church, every school, every public building, and nearly every private home was converted into a makeshift field hospital. The wounded lay so thick on the floors that one could barely walk without stepping on a blood-soaked, groaning body. Surgeons, their arms stained red to the elbows, worked for days without sleep, the sound of the bone saw a constant, gruesome rhythm. Amputated limbs were thrown out of windows, piling up in gruesome, fly-covered mounds. The dead were buried in shallow, hastily dug graves, their locations often marked with nothing more than a stick or a rock. For weeks, the town was a charnel house, a place of profound suffering and despair. It is this immense, concentrated agony that is believed to have left an indelible psychic scar on the land, creating one of the most haunted places in the entire world. Today, the Gettysburg Battlefield is a national park, a place of serene, rolling hills, solemn monuments, and quiet reflection. But for those who are sensitive to its echoes, it is anything but peaceful. The paranormal activity reported here is as vast and varied as the battle itself. It is not confined to a single house or a single location, but seems to permeate the entire 6,000-acre park. One of the most infamous and active areas is Devil's Den, a strange, almost supernatural-looking jumble of massive granite boulders on the southern end of the battlefield. It was the scene of some of the most brutal fighting of the second day, a chaotic and bloody struggle for control of the high ground. For decades, visitors to Devil's Den have reported a host of strange phenomena. The most famous is the apparition of a Confederate sharpshooter, often described as a man with long hair, ragged clothes, and no shoes, who appears among the rocks. He has been known to interact with visitors, sometimes pointing towards Little Round Top and saying, "What you're looking for is over there," before vanishing into thin air. Many believe this is the spirit of a Texan soldier, still fighting a battle that ended over 150 years ago. The area is also known for causing cameras and other electronic equipment to malfunction, and for the distinct feeling of being watched from the shadowy crevices between the boulders. Little Round Top, the rocky hill that saw the heroic and desperate defense by the 20th Maine Regiment, is another paranormal hotspot. Visitors have reported seeing the full-bodied apparition of a man in a Union uniform, who appears for a moment, looks out over the battlefield, and then fades away. The smell of gunpowder and the sound of phantom musket fire are often reported, even on still, quiet days. One of the most compelling stories comes from a group of historical reenactors who were filming on the hill. As they prepared for a scene, they saw a strange, disheveled old man in an authentic but tattered Union uniform appear among them. He handed them a few musket rounds, saying, "Here, you'll be needing these," and then walked off. The reenactors, impressed by his commitment to his character, went to thank him, but he was nowhere to be found. When they examined the musket rounds he had given them, they were found to be authentic, pristine rounds from the Civil War era. The area known as the Slaughter Pen, a rocky, wooded ravine at the base of Little Round Top, is said to be one of the most terrifying places on the battlefield. It was here that the fighting was at its most savage, a brutal, close-quarters melee. Visitors to this area have reported hearing the sounds of men screaming in agony, the clash of bayonets, and the phantom commands of officers urging their men forward. Many have been overcome by a sudden, intense feeling of rage and aggression, while others have fled in terror, claiming to have been touched or pushed by an unseen force. The buildings of Gettysburg are no less haunted than the fields. The Whaley House, the home of the only civilian killed during the battle, is a site of constant activity. Jenny Wade, a 20-year-old woman, was kneading dough in her sister's kitchen when a stray Confederate bullet passed through two doors and struck her in the back, killing her instantly. Today, visitors to the house report the smell of baking bread, the sound of a woman weeping, and the distinct feeling of a cold spot in the very place where she died. The ghosts of children are also said to play in the house, their laughter echoing from the empty rooms. The Farnsworth House Inn, which served as a Confederate sharpshooter's nest and later as a hospital, is considered to be one of the most haunted inns in America. It is said to be home to at least 16 spirits. Guests have reported seeing the apparitions of Confederate soldiers in the hallways, hearing the groans of wounded men from empty rooms, and feeling the gentle touch of a ghostly nurse, believed to be a woman named Mary, who cared for the dying. The attic is particularly active, with many guests reporting the sound of a heavy, dragging object, believed by some to be the body of a soldier being moved. Paranormal investigators have captured a staggering amount of evidence at Gettysburg. They have recorded thousands of EVPs, capturing the sounds of battle, the names of soldiers, and intelligent responses to questions. They have photographed full-bodied apparitions, shadowy figures, and strange, unexplained mists. One famous photograph, taken at the triangular field, appears to show the ghostly images of soldiers emerging from the woods. The ghosts of Gettysburg are a part of the American story. They are the spectral residue of a nation's greatest trauma, the echoes of the bravery, fear, and sacrifice that defined a generation. To walk these hallowed grounds is to walk among the ghosts of history, to feel the immense weight of the past, and to understand that some events are so powerful, so tragic, that they can never truly end. The battle is over, but for the spirits of Gettysburg, the war goes on forever. In the Gilded Age of St. Louis, a city built on river trade and the boundless optimism of westward expansion, one name stood above all others in the heady world of brewing: Lemp. The story began with Johann Adam Lemp, a German immigrant who arrived in 1838 with little more than a dream and a revolutionary recipe for lager beer. At a time when Americans primarily drank harsh Ales and potent whiskeys, Adam's crisp, smooth lager was a revelation. He founded the Western Brewery in 1840, and utilizing the vast network of natural limestone caves beneath the city for lagering, he pioneered a brewing process that would make him a millionaire. The Lemp family fortune grew into a vast empire, a dynasty built on hops, barley, and an unshakable will to dominate. In 1876, his son, William J. Lemp Sr., a man of immense ambition and ruthless business acumen, built a magnificent 33-room mansion on Domeno Place, a wealthy, gaslit street that would soon be known as Millionaire's Row. The house was a monument to his success, a Victorian masterpiece of ornate woodwork, soaring ceilings, and imported Italian marble. It had its own ballroom, a private bowling alley, and a special atrium, the first of its kind in St. Louis, where William kept his collection of exotic plants and birds. It was here, within these opulent walls, that the seeds of a great American tragedy were sown. The mansion was to become less of a home and more of a grand, Gothic tomb, a place where a family's immense fortune could not protect them from a darkness that seemed to fester within their own bloodline, a melancholy as pervasive as the scent of brewing mash that hung over the city. The first shadow fell in 1901, and it was a long one. Frederick Lemp, William Sr.'s favorite son, the brilliant and beloved heir apparent to the brewing empire, died under mysterious circumstances. His health had always been frail, but his sudden death at the age of 28, attributed officially to heart failure, devastated the patriarch. William Lemp Sr., the indomitable beer baron who had crushed his competitors and bent the city to his will, was himself broken. He retreated from the brewery, from society, and into the cavernous, lonely rooms of his mansion. He became a recluse, a ghost in his own home, often seen staring blankly at a portrait of Frederick that hung in the main hall. A profound and oppressive silence fell over the house, the servants whispering that the master had lost his soul when his son had lost his life. On the bitterly cold morning of February 13, 1904, a single, sharp gunshot echoed through the mansion. Servants rushed to William Sr.'s bedroom, a lavish chamber on the second floor with a commanding view of the city he had helped build. They found him in his bed, a .38 caliber revolver in his hand and a self-inflicted wound to his head. The king was dead. His suicide note was a testament to his bottomless despair, speaking of a sad and empty life. The first of the Lemp family had taken their own life within the mansion's walls, and a dark precedent had been set. A palpable gloom, cold and permanent as the marble fireplaces, settled over the house. William Billy Lemp Jr. took over the family business. He tried to steer the brewery through changing times, but the Lemp dynasty was already on a collision course with history. The coming of Prohibition in 1919 was not just a challenge, it was an execution. The Volstead Act rendered their primary business illegal overnight. The Great Lemp Brewery, once the pride of St. Louis, a sprawling complex that covered 5 city blocks, was forced to shut down its operations. The fires in the kilns went out, and a deafening silence fell over the massive brewery. In 1922, Billy sold the iconic Lemp Falstaff logo and the brewery's assets for a pittance of their former worth. The family empire had crumbled into dust. The family's tragedies, however, were far from over. The house on Domeno Place seemed to incubate their despair, its luxurious rooms becoming echo chambers for grief. Elsa Lemp, William Sr.'s youngest and most beloved daughter, was a troubled woman. Described in society pages as the belle of St. Louis, she was nonetheless plagued by a deep-seated melancholy, her life marked by a tumultuous marriage to Thomas Wright, president of a local hardware company, and a bitter, public divorce. On March 20, 1920, she shot herself through the heart in the bedroom of her own stately home, leaving behind a note that simply read, "If this is life, I do not want any of it." While her death did not occur in the mansion itself, her spirit, it is said, returned to the family home, unable to rest, her sorrow adding another layer to the building's oppressive atmosphere. Staff and visitors would later report seeing a lady in white who would stare sadly out the window before vanishing. Billy Lemp Jr. lived on in the mansion with his wife and children, a king presiding over a fallen kingdom. But the weight of the family's legacy and the failure of the brewery wore on him. His marriage fell apart, his wife leaving him, and his life became a series of legal and financial battles. He watched as the world his father had built dissolved around him. On December 29, 1922, just months after selling the brewery, Billy Lemp Jr. walked into his office on the second floor of the mansion, the same room that had once been the epicenter of a brewing empire. He raised a pistol to his chest and fired, taking his own life in almost the same manner as his sister Elsa. The curse had claimed another victim. The mansion, now a house of public record for death and despair, was sold. It was converted into a boarding house, its grand rooms carved up into smaller, more manageable lodgings. It was during this period that the stories of its haunting truly began to take root. Boarders spoke of a house that was never quiet. They heard phantom footsteps pacing the hallways at all hours of the night, the heavy tread of a businessman and the lighter, weeping footfalls of a grieving woman. Doors would lock and unlock on their own, and the sound of a woman crying would drift from empty rooms. The grand piano in the main parlor, untouched for years, would often play a few sad, discordant notes in the dead of night, as if an unseen hand were trying to recall a long-forgotten tune. The strangest and most persistent legend, however, was that of the monkey-faced boy. According to local lore, William Sr. had an illegitimate son named Zeke, born with Down syndrome. To hide this shame from the prying eyes of St. Louis society, the family allegedly kept the boy hidden away in the mansion's attic for his entire life, a secret prisoner in a gilded cage. The sounds of a child running and playing were often heard from the attic, and some claimed to see a small, pale face with distorted features peering down from the attic windows, a lonely sentinel watching the world go by. The last of the Lemp line to die in the house was Charles Lemp, William Sr.'s third son. A brilliant man who had helped run the brewery, he became a reclusive, eccentric figure after the family's collapse. He lived in the mansion as a boarder even after his family had sold it, a quiet man surrounded by the ghosts of his family. In 1949, at the age of 77, he meticulously planned his own end. In a final, heartbreaking act of compassion, he first took his beloved dog to the basement and shot it. Then he returned to his own room, lay down on his bed, and took his own life with a gunshot to the chest. His suicide note was as cold and precise as his final actions. "In case I am found dead," it read, "blame it on no one but me." With his death, the Lemp family line effectively ended. After Charles's death, the mansion's reputation as a haunted place was sealed. In the 1970s, the house was purchased by the Pointer family, who renovated it and opened it as a restaurant and inn. The renovation seemed to stir the dormant spirits to a new level of activity. Staff and diners alike reported a staggering array of paranormal phenomena. Glasses would fly off the bar, shattered by an unseen force. The apparitions of William Lemp Sr. and his wife, Julia, were often seen, dressed in their Victorian finery, silently observing the restaurant's patrons from the top of the grand staircase. A ghostly woman in a white dress, believed to be Elsa, was frequently seen near that same staircase, her expression one of profound sadness, before she would fade away. The most active area, however, remained the third-floor attic, the supposed prison of the monkey-faced boy, Zeke. Employees cleaning the attic would find toys that had been moved and arranged in neat circles. The sound of a child's laughter would echo from the empty space, and guests staying in the rooms below would complain of the constant sound of a child running back and forth above them all night long, the pitter-patter of small feet a constant, lonely rhythm. Paranormal investigators have flocked to the Lemp Mansion for decades, and many have left with compelling evidence. Electronic voice phenomena, EVP, recordings have captured disembodied voices whispering names: Billy, Elsa, Charles. One investigator, alone in William Sr.'s bedroom, asked, "Mr. Lemp, why did you do it?" A moment later, his audio recorder captured a faint, sighing whisper that sounded like, "So sad." Another, conducting a session in the attic, asked if anyone was there and recorded a child's voice clearly saying, "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." Today, the Lemp Mansion stands as a popular restaurant and one of America's most famous haunted inns. To dine there is to sit amongst the ghosts of a fallen dynasty. To spend the night is to invite a personal encounter with the Lemp family's eternal sorrow. The house is a beautiful, tragic monument to a family curse, a place where immense wealth and power offered no sanctuary from the darkness that lurked within their own minds and, perhaps, within the very walls of their home. The spirits of the Lemps remain, forever trapped in the mansion that witnessed their rise and their spectacular, heartbreaking fall. In the year 1817, the American frontier was a place of deep woods, rolling hills, and a profound, almost suffocating isolation. It was a land that demanded resilience, a place where a man's fortune was carved from the wilderness with sweat, grit, and prayer. John Bell was the very embodiment of such a man. A decorated veteran of the Revolutionary War and a respected elder in the Red River Baptist Church, he had built a prosperous life for his family on a sprawling 320-acre farm in Robertson County, Tennessee. His wife, Lucy, was a woman of quiet strength and unshakable faith, and their home, a large, sturdy double-log cabin, was filled with the comings and goings of their 9 children. It was a good life, an American dream taking root in the rich, red Tennessee soil. The days were long and laborious, but the nights were peaceful, filled with the gentle chorus of crickets and the rustle of the wind through the vast cornfields that stretched out like a dark sea under the moon. This profound peace was shattered in the late summer of that year, on a day that began as ordinary as any other. John Bell was inspecting his cornfields, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, when he saw it. Perched on a fence row, silhouetted against the setting sun, was an animal the likes of which he had never seen in all his years of farming and hunting. It had the muscular body of a large dog, but the head of a rabbit, with long, twitching ears and unsettlingly intelligent eyes that seemed to watch him with a cool, unnatural stillness. It was a creature of impossible biology, a living violation of God's natural order. A devout man, John's first instinct was that he was looking at some kind of demonic omen. Without a second thought, he raised his rifle, the familiar weight of it a small comfort. He took careful aim and fired. The shot echoed across the fields, but the creature simply vanished, as if the musket ball had passed through thin air. There was no yelp, no puff of fur, nothing. Shaken to his core, John returned to his cabin, the strange encounter weighing heavily on his mind. He decided not to mention it to his family, not wanting to frighten them over what his rational mind insisted must have been a trick of the light, a figment of his imagination brought on by fatigue. That night, the terror began. It started as a faint knocking sound on the outside of the cabin walls, a persistent, rhythmic tapping that seemed to move around the house, testing its defenses. At first, John and his older sons presumed it was a traveler seeking shelter, a common enough occurrence. But when they opened the heavy wooden door, they found nothing but the empty, moon-drenched yard. The knocking grew louder each night, more aggressive, joined by a harsh scraping sound, like talons or claws dragging along the wooden logs, searching for a way in. Soon, it sounded as if heavy stones were being hurled against the cabin, and the whole structure would shudder from the impact. Yet, in the morning light, there was never a single stone to be found, no mark upon the wood, no evidence of the nocturnal assault save for the family's own growing fear. Within weeks, the unseen force breached the cabin's walls and invaded the family's life. The nights became a gauntlet of psychological torment. It started in the room where the younger children slept. The heavy quilts that Lucy had stitched by hand would be violently ripped from their beds, snatched away by an invisible hand, leaving them shivering and crying out in the cold night air. The sounds escalated from simple knocking to a cacophony of horrors, the noise of heavy chains being dragged across the floorboards, the vicious snarling of fighting dogs that seemed to erupt from thin air, and the frantic, deafening flutter of 1,000 wings beating against the ceiling. The entity soon chose its primary victim, the Bells' youngest and most beloved daughter, Elizabeth, known to all as Betsy. She was a bright, pretty girl of 12, on the cusp of womanhood, full of life and laughter. The spirit seemed to fixate on her with a cruel, malevolent intelligence, as if her youthful innocence was an affront to its own dark nature. The torment was relentless and terrifyingly physical. she would be slapped by an unseen hand, the sharp crack echoing in the silent room, leaving fiery red welts on her face that would appear before her family's horrified eyes. Her long, dark hair would be pulled until she screamed, great knots forming in her tresses that were impossible to untangle. Pins would be stuck into her body, and she would often complain of being pinched and bruised by an invisible tormentor. She began to suffer from fainting spells, and her body would often go rigid, her jaw locked tight as if in the throes of a terrible seizure, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The family began to hear other sounds, too. Faint whispers that seemed to come from the corners of the room, the sound of an old woman humming a tuneless, discordant hymn that made their skin crawl. The air would grow thick with the grotesque sound of smacking, gulping lips, as if an unseen creature were feasting right beside them in the dark. The Bells were deeply religious people, and they turned to prayer, their voices rising in desperate harmony. But their pleas to God seemed only to amuse the entity, which would often mock their prayers with its own distorted, blasphemous whispers, twisting the sacred words into something ugly and profane. Terrified and exhausted, his family on the brink of collapse, John Bell finally broke his silence and confided in his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston, a practical, no-nonsense man, agreed to spend the night. As the family huddled in the main room, the fire casting long, dancing shadows, the familiar sounds began. Johnston sat, listening intently, his face a mask of concentration. Then, the entity did something it had never done before. The whispers coalesced into a clear, articulate voice. "Who is this man you have brought here, John?" it rasped, the voice seeming to come from the very air itself, a ghastly sound, weak and whistling at first, like wind through a keyhole, but it grew in strength and confidence with each passing night. The entity had found its voice, and with it, a new and terrible power. It began to hold court. When asked who it was, it gave various, contradictory answers. Sometimes it claimed to be the spirit of a person whose bones lay in an unmarked grave in the woods, other times it claimed to be a demon sent from hell itself, one of Legion's own. But most often, and with the most venom, it identified itself as the Witch of Kate Batts, a cantankerous neighbor with whom John Bell had a minor but unpleasant business dispute over a land purchase years earlier. Whether it was truly the spirit of the still-living Kate Batts, a practitioner of dark arts capable of astral projection, or something far older and more sinister using her name as a convenient mask, no one could say. But the name stuck. The entity became known far and wide as the Bell Witch. The news of the talking, tormenting spirit spread like wildfire. The Bell Farm became a macabre destination. People traveled for hundreds of miles to witness the phenomena for themselves. The cabin was often filled with dozens of curious visitors, and Kate seemed to revel in the attention. Its voice, now booming and powerful, would engage in long, complex conversations. It demonstrated an impossible knowledge, quoting scripture from two different sermons being preached miles apart at the exact same time. It knew the deepest, darkest secrets of the visitors, revealing their past sins and hidden transgressions to their great shock and mortification, turning friends against each other with its poisonously accurate gossip. The most famous of these visitors was allegedly General Andrew Jackson, a hero of the War of 1812 and a future President of the United States. Intrigued by the stories, Jackson arrived with a retinue of men and a large wagon, determined to expose the whole affair as a hoax. As his party approached the Bell property, the wagon suddenly stopped dead. The horses strained and panicked, but the wheels were frozen, as if held by an immense, unseen weight. Jackson, a man not known for his patience, reportedly exclaimed, "By the Eternal, boys, it's the witch." At that moment, a sharp, disembodied voice cried out from the woods, its tone dripping with mocking amusement, "All right, General, let the wagon proceed." And just as suddenly, the wagon was free. Later that night, one of Jackson's men, a self-proclaimed witch tamer who boasted of having a silver bullet that could kill any supernatural entity, was mercilessly tormented. The man began to twitch and then scream, crying out that he was being stuck with pins and beaten by an invisible force. He fled the cabin in terror, and Jackson and his men, thoroughly convinced and deeply unnerved, departed the very next morning. Jackson was later quoted as saying, "I would rather fight the entire British Army than face the Bell Witch again." For 4 years, the entity held the Bell family in its thrall. But its most venomous hatred was reserved for the patriarch, Old Jack Bell, as it derisively called him. "I am determined to haunt and torment old John Bell to his death." The witch shrieked on numerous occasions, its voice filled with a chilling, personal malice. John's health began to fail dramatically. He suffered from episodes where his tongue would swell in his mouth, making it impossible for him to speak or swallow. He had violent seizures that left him weak and disoriented. Throughout his decline, the witch tormented him relentlessly, its voice cursing him, its invisible hands slapping his face and pulling his hair as he lay helpless in his bed, a prisoner in his own home. In December of 1820, after a particularly bad spell, John Bell fell into a stupor from which he could not be roused. His son, John Jr., went to the medicine cupboard and found a small, smoky-colored vial that no one recognized. The family was gathered around the bed, their hearts heavy with dread, when the witch's voice filled the room, booming with triumph. "It's useless for you to try to relieve old Jack," it gloated. "I have given him a big dose of that last night, and that has done the business for him." To test the claim, they cautiously administered a drop of the vial's contents to the family cat, which convulsed and died almost instantly. John Bell passed away shortly after. His funeral was a somber affair, but during the procession, the witch's voice could be heard singing bawdy, celebratory drinking songs, its laughter echoing over the graveside prayers. The Bell Witch case remains the only one in American history in which a spirit is officially credited by witnesses with causing the death of a human being. With John Bell gone, the entity's primary purpose seemed fulfilled. It continued to torment Betsy for a time, harassing her fiancé, Joshua Gardner, with spectral taunts and physical assaults until their engagement was broken off, ensuring her misery. Then, one day in 1821, the voice announced to Lucy Bell that it would be leaving. "I will return in 7 years," it promised. True to its word, in 1828, the entity returned for a few weeks, its presence felt but its actions less violent. Before departing again, it made one final, chilling promise: it would return again in 107 years, in the year 1935, to one of John Bell's direct descendants. Whether it ever made good on that final promise is a matter of local legend. But the story of the Bell Witch has never left the hills of Adams, Tennessee. It has become a cornerstone of American folklore, a terrifying testament to a family's ordeal and a chilling reminder that there are forces in this world that are ancient, intelligent, and profoundly malevolent. The spirit of Kate Batts, or whatever it was that wore her name, proved that the greatest horrors are not always confined to the pages of fiction. Sometimes, they move into your home.